The first night was quiet, almost peaceful. At least it felt that way at first. We had just moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. My wife unpacked dishes while the kids ran around, laughing, unaware of the shadows that seemed too still in the corners. I thought it was just fatigue. New place. Strange angles. Then I saw it. A face in the window, pale, expressionless, watching me from outside. I blinked. Nothing. I told myself it was a reflection, a trick of the streetlight. I tried to focus on the sound of the children playing. Later that night, I woke to a feeling that someone was in the room with me. I could hear it before I saw it. The soft breathing, deliberate, patient. I sat up. The bedroom was empty. The air was cold, heavier than it should have been. The whisper came first. Not a voice I recognized, not a language I knew, just a low, accusing tone that pressed against my mind. "You cannot escape." I froze. My heart hammered. My wife stirred in her sleep. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The next morning, the kids complained of nightmares. Shadows in their room that weren't there during the day. Faces peering at them from the corners. Pale, empty, watching. I wanted to tell them it was just fear, just imagination, but something inside me already knew. This was different. By nightfall, I noticed it everywhere. A figure sitting silently in the corner of the living room, watching us, waiting. Not moving, not speaking, only observing. And when one of my children cried out, I saw it lean slightly toward them. Not aggressively, not violently, but deliberately, as if deciding. I swallowed hard and whispered to myself that this was just the first night, that maybe tomorrow it would go away, but I already knew it wouldn't. The second night was worse. I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the apartment felt alive. The shadows were heavier, denser, as if they were collecting there, waiting. I kept thinking of the face in the window from the night before. Pale, silent, and unblinking. I tried to ignore it. I told myself the kids needed me to stay calm. But as I walked through the living room, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Not fast, not sudden, just a slow shift, a silhouette near the wall. Watching, I stopped, held my breath. The figure didn't move, didn't vanish. It only waited. I whispered to myself that it was nothing. A trick of the light, a shadow of the lamp. Then the whisper returned. "You cannot hide it." This time it was clearer, not just a tone in my head. A voice, low and deliberate, brushing against my ears. I felt my skin crawl. My hands shook. In the kids' room, I saw a faint outline by the closet. Pale, thin, staring. I called their names, but when they woke, there was no one there. Only the sense of being watched, only the lingering chill in the air. I sat with them until morning, exhausted, heart hammering, telling myself the day would make it better. That perhaps it had only come for the night. It didn't leave. By afternoon, strange things happened. Dishes moved. Chairs slightly shifted. The television turned on and off without touch. I told my wife, who smiled and said I was overworked. I wanted to believe her. That night, it grew bolder. The figure appeared at the foot of my bed, clearer than before. Its face twisted, but not in rage, more like recognition, like it knew me. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The whisper was everywhere. They are yours now. I understood immediately. It wasn't just watching, it was choosing, and the fear in me was not just for myself. It was for them, my wife, my children. The third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The figure was no longer in the shadows. It moved, slowly, deliberately, just beyond the edge of my vision. My wife stirred in her sleep, and I saw it glance at her before turning back to me. Its face was pale, stretched, impossibly still. Its eyes held something I couldn't name. Knowledge, judgment, hunger. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The whisper was louder now. They belonged to me. It wasn't just a threat. It was certainty. I felt it before I saw it. A cold brush on my arm, gentle, almost like someone testing the skin, seeing if it would give way. I pulled back, but the sensation lingered. Not fear, not pain, presence, awareness. That night, my son woke screaming. His small body shook. I ran to him, and for a moment, the ghost was gone. But then I saw it again, reflected in the mirror across the hallway, standing behind my son, watching him sleep, waiting. I held my son close. The whisper came again, but this time through his lips. He didn't speak it. His mouth moved, and the words slid out as if he was channeling something I couldn't control. "You cannot hide it." I froze, staring at him, unsure whether to scream or faint. By morning he remembered nothing, but I did, and I knew this was only the beginning. The shadows lingered through the day. I felt eyes on us even in the brightest light. At work, in the streets, everywhere I went, I imagined faces peering at me, whispering, testing, and every night they returned. This was no longer just watching. This was interaction. The ghosts wanted more than acknowledgement. They wanted participation. I didn't know how to protect them. I didn't know how to protect myself. And I realized with a cold certainty the curse was awake. It doesn't wait for night. I can't tell anymore when it begins. One moment the living room is quiet. The next I feel it in the air. A presence that doesn't belong. Not a shadow, not a reflection, but something that watches, follows, studies. Its face appears for a heartbeat in the hallway mirror. Pale, hollowed, wide-eyed, then gone. I notice my daughter talking to someone I can't see. Not imaginary. She reacts, smiles nervously, whispers back. I ask her who she's speaking to, but she doesn't answer. Her eyes glance to corners that are empty. Or maybe they aren't. Objects move subtly. A book on the table tilts. A chair shifts just enough to unsettle the floorboards. I reach for them. Nothing. But the feeling lingers, like it's telling me it could strike at any second. I wake sweating. My wife sits across from me, staring into nothing. Her eyes don't blink. When I speak, she murmurs words that aren't hers. Words I've never said. And when I look away, she smiles faintly at the corner of the room. The whispers come again, soft, everywhere. Sometimes in my ears, sometimes in my chest. You cannot protect them. I don't know if it's the house, the family, or me. But one thing is certain. It is testing me. It is choosing someone. I can feel the pull, like my own shadow is splitting, preparing to leave me behind. The children are restless. They wake crying, sometimes screaming, sometimes laughing softly at something invisible. I watch them, helpless. I want to intervene, but each attempt is met with a subtle resistance, a tug in the air, as if I'm being reminded I am not in control. And the faces, oh the faces, pale, wet-looking, smiling faintly or twisted with accusation. They appear for the briefest moments in mirrors, in reflections on glass, in the dark, watching, judging, waiting. I realize slowly, a cold realization creeping through my bones. It is not enough for them to exist unseen. They want acknowledgement, interaction, participation, and soon they will take it. I began noticing it in small ways first. My son picked up a toy and turned it over in his hands like he had never held it before. But the way he turned it, the gestures, the way his fingers curled, it was not his movement, not mine. Someone else's, watching him, teaching him, or forcing him. I froze. My heart pounded. I called his name. He looked at me and smiled, that innocent smile children have. But the eyes, they weren't entirely his. Too sharp, too still. Later, my wife was setting the table. Plates lifted slightly, as if guided by invisible hands. Her movements faltered, but she didn't speak. I could see a flicker across her face, a momentary blankness, and then she smiled faintly at the empty corner of the room. It was the first time I understood. This wasn't just watching anymore. It was practice, testing the limits, preparing. I saw one of the faces clearly that night, reflected in the hallway mirror. Pale, wet-looking, twisted just enough to feel alive. Its eyes locked with mine, wide, knowing, accusing. A face that had been there long before me, long before my family. It whispered something I could almost understand. We have waited. We remember. You belong. The air shifted, heavy, pressing down. I stepped closer, and my son's voice echoed, repeating something he could not possibly know. Do you remember us? I did not answer. I couldn't. I felt the tug inside him, a small, almost imperceptible twist in his expression, like a hand reaching through his body. I realized then, with a cold certainty, that one of them would change, one of us. And it would begin with the smallest hesitation, the tiniest gap in our attention. I sat in silence for hours. My wife didn't speak. The children didn't move. And yet, I knew. They were not entirely themselves, and the curse. It had already begun. Something in the family had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No screams. No sudden violence. Just a quiet wrongness that settled into everyday moments. My daughter stopped asking questions. She watched instead. Long, careful looks at faces, at hands, at the spaces between people. When I asked her what she was thinking about, she said, "They say you already know." I asked who they were. She frowned, as if the answer should have been obvious. The ones that stay. I saw one of them clearly for the first time in the kitchen. Not in a mirror. Not in the corner of my eye. Standing near the sink, tall and thin, its face uneven, like it had been shaped by hands that did not care. Its eyes were open too wide. Its mouth hung slightly apart, wet and breathing. It watched my wife, closely. Carefully, my wife didn't see it. Or maybe she did and didn't react. Her hands shook as she poured water into a glass. The water overflowed. She didn't notice. She was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I touched her arm, she flinched, hard, as if waking from deep sleep. "I heard someone call me," she said. "But it wasn't you." That night, my son sat up in bed and spoke without opening his eyes. "They remember what you forgot." The voice was not his. It was older, slower, patient in a way that frightened me more than anger ever could. I shook him. He went limp, then heavy, then normal again. He didn't remember speaking. He didn't remember waking, but something stayed with him. I could see it in the way he held himself, like someone else had tested his body and left a mark behind. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. Stories my parents avoided, names that were never spoken, a sense of shame that didn't belong to any single moment, but to a pattern. That was when I understood. This wasn't a haunting that found us, it was a debt, and it had finally come due. The ghosts stopped whispering in fragments. They started using names, not calling out, not shouting, just saying them softly, the way someone does when they are close enough to feel your breath. I would hear my wife's name behind me while she stood in front of me. I would hear my son's name spoken from the hallway while he slept beside me. And sometimes they said mine. When they did, the air changed. It pressed inward, like the room was leaning closer to listen. I saw them more clearly now. Faces that looked almost human, but wrong in careful ways. Skin too tight, eyes set too far apart, mouths that smiled without warmth. They watched us from doorways, from the edges of rooms, from places that should have been empty. One of them followed my daughter, not touching her, not threatening, just staying close. I saw it crouched beside her while she drew on the floor, its head tilted, studying her hands as she moved the crayon back and forth. She didn't look afraid. That scared me more than anything. "They say I draw like her," she told me. I asked who. She looked at me with confusion. "The one who cried a lot." That night, I dreamed of a woman I didn't recognize. She sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, her face buried in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were black and wet, her mouth trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. When I woke, I felt grief that wasn't mine. My wife began forgetting small things. Where she put her phone, what day it was, then larger things. Conversations we had just finished. At times, she stared at me, like she was trying to remember how we knew each other. Once, she leaned close and whispered, "If I go quiet, don't let them finish." I asked her what she meant. She didn't remember saying it. I realized then that possession wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic. It was erosion, a slow wearing down of who someone was, until there was room for something else. The ghosts didn't rush. They had waited too long for that. I learned her story without anyone saying a word. It was everywhere. Memories I never had but felt, whispered by the figures in corners, pressed into the edges of the children's laughter, lurking in the pauses of my wife's sentences. The family had a secret, an old wound that had never been spoken aloud. The ghost called her the one who cried. I saw her face in reflections on glass, in passing strangers, in the shapes that lingered too long at the edge of vision. Pale, wet-faced, sorrowful, eyes that begged for recognition. She watched my daughter, mirrored in a way that made me feel the years we hadn't lived yet. Objects began moving with intention. A chair tipped ever so slightly toward my daughter while she drew. A pen rolled off the table, stopping by her hand as if placed there. The whispers became names, small phrases, tiny commands. Look, do not sleep. Remember us. I tried to research, tried to ask questions of relatives. The family history was fragmented, filled with stories of children who vanished, of parents who blamed themselves, of a curse passed silently through generations. Names were missing from records, events were obscured, and the more I learned, the more the ghost pressed close. I could feel her presence when I slept. She leaned in beside my daughter. She whispered through my wife's lips. She lingered where I could not reach. The first signs of possession became clear. My wife sometimes spoke words she had never known. My son's expressions would change for a few seconds, then flick back as if nothing had happened. But I could see the weight in their eyes, a memory not theirs, an emotion borrowed. The ghost was patient. It didn't need fear, it only needed time. And time was something it had, and something we did not. I understood slowly. If we ignored her, she would grow. She would stretch her influence. She would choose. And when she did, it would not be reversible. I started noticing it in their breathing. Not all the time. Just in moments when the house was quiet, when no one was speaking, when the day seemed to pause. My wife would inhale too deeply, then hold it for a second too long, like someone else was testing her lungs. My son's chest would rise and fall in a rhythm that didn't match sleep. Sometimes, when I sat beside them, I felt like I was listening to more than one breath. The ghosts no longer hid when I entered a room. They stood where they pleased. Near the doorway, against the wall, sitting on the edge of the couch, close enough that the cushions dipped slightly beneath them. Their faces were clearer now, lines where no lines should be. Skin stretched thin, eyes that reflected light wrong. One of them spoke to me directly, not loudly, not angrily. "You left her," it said. I asked who. It smiled, slow and knowing. "You all did." My daughter stopped sleeping through the night. She would sit up and stare at the door, her lips moving slightly. When I asked what she was saying, she replied, "I'm counting what? Time," she said. Before she finishes, I felt something inside me tighten. I confronted my wife gently, asked her if she remembered anything strange from her childhood. She hesitated, then shook her head, but her eyes filled with tears she couldn't explain. "I used to hear crying," she whispered, "in places where no one was." That night, I dreamed again of the woman, the one who cried. She stood in the corner of a dark room, her back to me. When she turned, her face was cracked with sorrow and anger. Her mouth opened, and my daughter's voice came out. "She's tired." I woke gasping, my chest burning, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. The next morning, my son asked me a question I will never forget. "Daddy," he said calmly, "what happens when someone finishes living inside you?" I had no answer, and the ghosts watched, closer than ever, as if waiting to hear it too. It started with gaps, small ones at first, minutes that didn't line up, conversations that ended before they began. My wife would ask me a question, then ask it again an hour later, word for word, with no memory of the first time. I stopped correcting her. I watched. One afternoon, my son was sitting at the table drawing. I stepped into the kitchen to pour water. When I came back, his drawing was finished. I hadn't heard a single movement. The paper showed figures I had never taught him to draw. Tall shapes, long arms, faces with mouths open too wide. In the corner, he had written a name. It wasn't his handwriting. When I asked him about it, he looked confused. He didn't remember drawing at all. That was when I noticed the smell, not rot, not decay, something older, damp and sour, like clothes left wet for years. It followed my wife sometimes, not always. Only when she was quiet for too long. The ghost spoke more freely now. "She is learning," one said, standing close enough that I could see the veins beneath its skin. "She remembers," said another, smiling at my daughter. I tried to leave with the kids. Packed a bag. Told myself we just needed air, space, distance. My wife stood in the doorway. Her face was calm. Too calm. "You can't take them," she said, in a voice that was not hers. She carried them once too. I felt the room tilt. I asked who she was. My wife blinked. For a moment she was herself again. Fear rushed back into her eyes. She grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "If I stop answering," she whispered, "don't follow me." Then she stepped back. The calm returned. That night I stayed awake. Every sound felt deliberate. Every breath felt borrowed. I watched my family sleep, counting their breaths, terrified that one of them would stop, and something else would continue instead. And, somewhere close, very close, a woman cried softly. Not in grief, in relief. I stopped asking the ghosts to leave. I started asking them questions. They didn't answer right away. They never rushed. They moved closer instead, filling rooms with their presence, standing behind chairs, leaning against walls, sitting where my family used to sit before they began drifting away from themselves. The one who cried appeared fully for the first time. Not a glimpse, not a reflection. She stood in front of me. Her face was swollen from crying, skin pale and blotched, eyes red and ruined. Her mouth trembled constantly, like it was still trying to hold back a sound that had already escaped too many times. She looked human, too human. She was ours, she said, her voice layered, overlapping with others. And you forgot. The memories came slowly, painfully. A woman in the family, generations ago. Young, alone, pregnant, hidden away so no one would know. She cried in silence so long that crying became all she was. When she died, she didn't leave. No one spoke her name again. That forgetting became the curse. Every generation passed it on, not through blood alone, but through silence, through shame, through pretending nothing had happened. She needs to live again, the ghost said gently. Just for a while. I understood then why possession was slow, why it was careful. It wasn't violence. It was inheritance. My wife had the strongest connection. Her bloodline was closest. Her body remembered even if her mind didn't. She carried children, the ghost said. She remembers how my stomach twisted. They weren't trying to destroy us. They were trying to continue. The crying stopped that night. For the first time since we arrived, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. My wife slept without moving, her face peaceful, empty. And when she opened her eyes in the morning, she smiled at me with a familiarity that wasn't love. It was recognition. By this point, nothing felt natural anymore. My wife moved through the apartment with grace that wasn't hers. Smooth, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Her eyes didn't follow me. They followed something else. Something in the empty corners, in the walls, in the spaces I couldn't reach. She spoke softly one morning, words I didn't recognize. Not a language I knew, yet perfectly clear to the children. They answered her without hesitation. They had begun learning from her, learning from her body, her voice, her movements, before I could intervene. I touched her arm once. She flinched, but not at me, at herself, and in that flinch I felt the presence settle deeper, filling her chest, her lungs, her blood. It wasn't angry. It wasn't violent. It was patient, waiting. Preparing. My daughter drew in silence for hours, copying shapes I didn't teach her. Faces. Twisted, wet faces. And words. Words that trembled on the paper, asking me questions I couldn't answer. Will you remember? The question was repeated in whispers behind my ears. In the kitchen. In the living room. On the stairs. Every corner of the apartment carried it. Every glance from my children carried it. Every pause in my wife's speech carried it. I realized I couldn't stop it. I could only watch. And the ghost, the one who cried, watched too. Standing behind my wife now, not fully visible, but her face pressed against mine in reflections. Silent, pale, accusing, satisfied. The air shifted around us. It weighed heavier on me than on them. I felt the curse settle on me differently. I was still me, still breathing, still aware, but I was no longer in control. When my wife smiled at me that evening, it was a smile not her own, and in it I saw the generations before us, waiting, watching, passing something forward that I could not undo. I understood then fully. This was not a haunting. This was inheritance. And it had begun. Life did not stop. That was the part I didn't expect. Meals were still cooked. Clothes were still folded. The children still laughed sometimes. But everything felt borrowed, like we were living inside a version of ourselves that belonged to someone else. My wife moved through the rooms, as if she had memorized them long ago. She touched the walls gently, like greeting old friends. Sometimes she whispered to them. Sometimes she listened, her head tilted, eyes unfocused. When I asked her questions, she answered carefully, too carefully. "You don't need to worry," she said once. "She only wants to be here." I asked who she was. My wife smiled, patient and tired. "You already know." The ghosts no longer hid at all. They stood openly now, near the children, near the doors, near me. Their faces were clearer than ever. Not monsters, not demons, just people ruined by time and memory. People who had waited too long. One of them spoke while my daughter slept. "We learned to stay quiet," it said. "That is how we survived." My son began losing time. He would sit down to watch television and suddenly hours would pass. When he looked at me, his eyes were older, heavier. He apologized for things he hadn't done. "I didn't mean to forget you," he said once, tears filling his eyes. I held him and felt something else holding him too. The one who cried appeared less often now. She didn't need to. She was already here, living, breathing, wearing someone I loved. I felt myself fading at the edges, not disappearing, being made unnecessary. That was the true horror, not death, replacement. I stopped trying to fix things. Every time I stepped in, the air tightened. The ghosts watched more closely. My wife's body reacted before her mind did, flinching, stiffening, correcting me without words. It was like pushing against a tide that had already decided where it was going. So I learned to observe. The children adjusted faster than I did. That terrified me. They spoke to her easily now. Not my wife, the one inside her. They didn't call her anything. They didn't need to. She answered when they spoke. Sometimes I saw flashes of the woman she had been, the one who cried. Her grief was quieter now, focused. She watched the children with something close to love. Not the right kind, but real enough to hurt. "She will protect them," one of the ghosts told me. "Better than you could." I hated how much that sentence worked its way into my thoughts. I tried to leave alone once, just to breathe, just to feel the world without their eyes on me. When I reached the door, my wife's voice stopped me. "You can go," she said gently, "but they will stay." I understood then that this wasn't about escape. It was about choice. Stay and witness the slow erasing of the life I knew. Or leave and become another story they would never finish telling. That night, the children slept peacefully. The ghosts were calm. The apartment felt settled, like a decision had been made without me. And I realized something worse than fear had taken hold. Resignation. I spent hours sitting in the living room, not touching anything, not speaking. The ghosts moved freely. Their faces hovered at the edges of my vision, pale, wet, quiet. Observing. They no longer needed to hide. I had learned not to look directly at them, but even so I could feel them watching every breath. My wife no longer looked at me like herself. Sometimes she looked like herself, but only sometimes. Most of the time she was someone else entirely. Someone older, someone who had lived too long in absence. The children slept through most of it, or maybe they didn't sleep at all. I could hear their quiet whispers in the next room, conversations I couldn't understand. I didn't try. I didn't move. I realized something about the curse. It didn't demand screams. It didn't demand terror. It demanded presence, observation, witnessing. That was how it fed itself. That was how it survived. And I had become its observer. I reached for my wife's hand once. She allowed it. For a moment I felt warmth. Then the weight of something else filled her palm, something patient, something that had waited decades. The one who cried hovered just behind her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had already won. I sat quietly and watched the small, subtle movements, the faint breaths, the tiny gestures that weren't theirs alone, and I understood completely. Nothing would ever be the same. And yet the room remained ordinary. The windows were clear, the lights worked, the children laughed softly, and the ghosts simply moved alongside us, inevitable, patient, eternal. I could do nothing but watch, and watch was enough. I stopped thinking of the ghosts as visitors. They were not passing through. They were not attached to the house. They were attached to us. I saw it clearly one morning when my wife stood at the sink, staring into the window instead of the glass. Her reflection lagged behind her movements. When she lifted her hand, the reflection lifted its hand slower, like it had to remember how. Her mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Then her reflection smiled, not her smile, too wide, too calm. She turned away from the sink and spoke to me, using my name correctly, using her voice perfectly. But something behind her eyes stayed unmoving, like a person pretending to be present. The children began forgetting small things, how to tie their shoes, where their school books were, which drawer held the spoons. Not all at once, just enough to feel wrong. I would answer their questions, and sometimes they would look at me like they didn't recognize the sound of my voice. The ghosts stood closer now. One sat at the end of the couch every evening, its shape thin and sagging, hands folded like it was waiting for instructions. Another leaned against the hallway wall, face half-formed, eyes too deep, following the children as they walked past. They never touched anything. They didn't need to. At night, I felt weight settle into the bed beside me, not pressing down, just existing, breathing without lungs, watching without blinking. My wife slept through it, or she pretended to. I stopped asking which one was true. I noticed the ghosts didn't watch me as much anymore. They watched my family. They studied how my wife spoke, how my son laughed, how my daughter held her hands when she was nervous. They were learning. And slowly, quietly, the people I loved began to hesitate before responding to their own names, like they were checking first, like they were making sure the answer was still theirs. The first thing I noticed was the delay. When my son turned his head, it happened in two parts. The intention came first. The movement followed, like something else had to approve it. He stood in the hallway one afternoon, staring at the wall, his fingers twitching at his side. I asked him what he was looking at. He answered a question I hadn't asked. "I won't touch it again." His voice sounded right. The words didn't. My daughter began standing in doorways, not crossing the threshold until someone else moved first. I watched her one night, as she waited outside her bedroom, eyes fixed on the floor, lips moving silently. When I asked her who she was talking to, she looked confused. "I wasn't talking," she said. But her mouth kept moving for a second after. The ghosts had changed. They were no longer pale or incomplete. They carried weight now, shape, definition. Their faces sharpened, lines deepening like memories settling into place. One of them walked through the living room using my wife's posture. The slight tilt of the head, the careful steps, the habit of touching the wall as she passed. I felt sick watching it practice. My wife cooked dinner that evening without using the stove. She placed cold food on warm plates and acted surprised when we noticed. She laughed, then stopped suddenly, like laughter was something she had copied instead of learned. That night, she turned toward me in bed and spoke in a voice that wasn't layered or distorted. It was simple. "We're staying." I asked who she meant. She stared at me, eyes wide and blank, and said, "We are." Her hand rested on my chest. It felt heavy in a way flesh shouldn't. I understood then that possession wasn't a takeover. It was a merge. The ghosts weren't removing anyone. They were adding themselves in, and the space they were taking came from the people I loved. I started losing time, not the kind where you black out, the kind where hours still pass, but you're not sure what you were thinking while they did. I would sit at the table and realize my hands were folded in a way I didn't remember choosing. I would stand up from a chair and feel like someone else had decided it was time. The ghosts no longer needed to stay in the corners. They stood in the center of rooms now, calm, familiar, like relatives you forget are dead. I tried to remember when I had stopped resisting. I couldn't find the moment. There was no single failure, just a long series of silences. I remembered the first night I saw them clearly, how I said nothing, how I told myself it was better not to scare the children, how I chose quiet over truth. That choice stayed. The ghosts fed on it. My wife began telling stories about her childhood that didn't belong to her, places she had never lived, names of people she had never met. She spoke with confidence, like memory itself had shifted ownership. When I corrected her once, she looked embarrassed. Then one of the ghosts corrected me. It stood close enough that I could see detail in its face. Pores, scars. A life that had ended badly. "You don't remember," it said gently. And the worst part was how easily doubt entered my mind. The children stopped asking questions altogether. They followed routines they hadn't been taught. They avoided mirrors. They avoided photographs. I found an old family picture and realized I couldn't remember the moment it was taken. I knew it was us. I just didn't know when or how many others were standing just out of frame. I understood then that regret was the doorway, not fear, not belief, regret. Every time I wished I had spoken sooner, acted faster, left earlier, something stepped forward to fill that space. The ghosts didn't punish us. They replaced us where we had already pulled away, and I was the one who made room. I stopped moving as much, not because I was afraid, not because I wanted to, because it felt useless. The apartment, or whatever space we occupied, was no longer ours. It belonged to them, to the one who cried, to the figures who had waited so long, to the weight of everything my family had ignored. I watched my wife set the table. Her movements were smooth, precise, almost like choreography, but her eyes were hollow at the edges, reflecting something that had no patience for human distraction. The children no longer hesitated to do as they were told. They moved through their routines without thinking, without laughing, without arguing. They obeyed something I could not see. The ghosts appeared constantly now. They leaned on furniture, stood in doorways, crossed the floor in ways I didn't notice until I felt the air shift. Their faces were sharp, detailed, entirely alive, watching, judging, waiting for the smallest error. And yet there was no scream, no confrontation, no dramatic moment, only quiet. I realized it was worse than any terror I had imagined. The horror was permanence, the slow replacement of my family, the fading of everyone I loved into something else, someone else, something not entirely human. I had become a witness, nothing more. I spoke once. My voice felt foreign even to me. "They're yours now," I said. No one answered. But I saw the faintest tilt of heads, the smallest acknowledgement, as if they understood the truth of my words better than I ever could. And in that silence, I understood fully that nothing I did would ever matter. The ghosts were patient. I was not. I sit now and watch. The room is full of movement, though nothing makes a sound. My wife walks past me, her body perfect, her eyes distant. My children follow her lead, their steps precise, measured, practiced. The ghosts move among them, seamless, weightless, as if they were always meant to be here. I am the only one who notices. The one who cried stands behind my wife, her pale face so close I can see the lines of grief etched deep into her skin. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her presence is enough. It presses into the space around her, fills it, claims it. The air is still, but heavy, thick with time that doesn't belong to me, with memories that aren't mine, with sorrow that has been collected over decades and finally placed here, in this family, in this moment. I feel my own body fading at the edges, not disappearing, not fully, just unnecessary, a witness without purpose. The curse doesn't destroy, it incorporates, it waits, it fills the spaces left open by hesitation, by regret, by silence. My family moves without hesitation now. They smile. They laugh softly. They speak quietly, gently, with voices that are theirs only in part. Everything else belongs elsewhere. I am still here, watching, breathing, remembering, and I know I will never intervene again, because there is nothing left to save. The curse has settled. Permanent, patient, complete. I am the witness, and that is enough. Story 2. I took the job because it was temporary. That mattered to me at the time. Temporary meant I would not get attached. Temporary meant I would not have to remember anything once it was over. The apartment complex was already half dead when I arrived. 3 buildings, all the same shape, concrete and narrow, stacked balconies like shelves. The city planned to tear it down in 6 months. Until then, someone had to walk the halls at night and make sure nothing caught fire, nothing collapsed, nothing drew attention. That someone was me. They gave me a ring of keys that felt too light, a clipboard with old inspection sheets, a warning not to let anyone inside who was not already living there. The front door lock had been broken for years. Everyone knew that. No one had fixed it. The handle turned even when it shouldn't. Inside, the lobby smelled like dust and old water. The lights were on, but dim, like they had learned to conserve energy without being told. Someone had left a chair near the mailboxes. It was facing the door, not the hallway. I did not move it. My job was simple. Walk each floor, check empty units, note damage, lock doors behind me. Locking doors was written on every page of the checklist. I started on the first floor. The hallway was long and straight, with identical doors on both sides. Some had eviction notices peeling off. Some had children's stickers still clinging near the handles. Most were supposed to be empty. Most doors were closed. The first one I opened was Unit 1C, empty, no furniture, just a dark rectangle where a couch had once been. The air inside felt colder than the hall. I checked the bathroom, dry, no leaks. When I stepped back into the hall, I pulled the door shut and locked it. I tested the handle twice, that felt important. I moved on. Halfway down the hall, I noticed another door was open. Unit 1 degree Fahrenheit. According to the sheet, it should have been sealed weeks ago. The opening was small, just wide enough to show darkness inside. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. I did not hear breathing. I did not hear movement. I pushed the door open. The apartment was empty, but it did not feel unused. The floor was clean. No dust, no footprints. The windows were closed. In the bedroom, the closet door was open. Nothing inside. When I left, I closed the door. I locked it. I wrote a note on the sheet. I told myself that was enough. On the second floor, a man sat on the stairs between levels. Elderly, thin. He held a grocery bag that looked empty. He nodded at me but did not speak. I asked if he was okay. He said, "You're new." I said yes. He looked past me, down the hall. "They leave things open," he said. I asked who. He did not answer. When I finished the second floor, I realized something small had changed. The hallway lights were all on now. Earlier, some had been out. I did not remember turning them on. On the third floor, I found a door unlocked that I knew I had locked. Unit 3A. The key turned too easily. Inside, the room was darker than before. The window looked black, like it was nighttime already, even though it wasn't. I stood in the doorway and felt the quiet press against me. Thick, expectant. I locked the door again. As I walked away, I heard a sound behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just the soft click of a lock turning. I did not look back. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures made noise. Everyone knew that. Still, when I reached the end of the hall, I checked my keys. They were all still there, and somewhere behind me, in a hallway I had just walked, a door was unlocked again. I started the second night with the same routine, because routines are supposed to keep things from changing. I signed in at the desk near the lobby. The pen was where I left it. The logbook was open to my name, already dated. I did not remember writing the date, but I did not stop to question it. The chair by the mailboxes was still there, facing the door. Someone had moved it closer. I picked up my clipboard and walked past it without sitting down. The front door was unlocked again. I pulled it closed behind me out of habit, even though I knew it wouldn't hold. The first floor hallway felt narrower than the night before. Not enough to measure, just enough to feel in my shoulders as I walked. Unit 1C was still locked. Unit 1F was open. I stopped in front of it and looked at the hinge. No damage, no pry marks. The door was open the way a door opens when someone forgets. Inside, the air smelled different, stale, like a room that had been occupied for a long time without being used. The living room was empty again, but the carpet showed a faint outline now. A shape where something heavy had been placed and left there for years. In the bedroom, the closet door was closed. I had not closed it the night before. I opened it slowly. Empty. No clothes. No boxes. The back wall showed scuff marks at shoulder height, as if someone had leaned there repeatedly. I locked the apartment. I tested the handle. Once. Twice. When I turned around, I saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway, not moving, just standing. It was a man. Pale skin. No expression. He stood in front of a door that had been boarded shut months ago. I waited for him to acknowledge me, to shift his weight, to breathe. He did none of those things. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded wrong in the hall, too loud, like it didn't belong. The man did not react. I took a step toward him, then another. Halfway down the hall, I noticed something else. Every door between us was open, all of them, left wide enough to show darkness inside. I stopped. The man was closer now, though I hadn't seen him move. I could see his eyes, open, wet, focused on the space just above my shoulder, not on my face. I backed away. Slowly, behind me, a door creaked. I did not turn around. I walked backward until my shoulder touched the wall. When I looked again, The man was gone. The doors were closed, all of them. On the second floor, the elderly man was still sitting on the stairs. Same place, same bag. You should check them twice, he said without looking at me. I asked him who kept opening the doors. He finally looked up. His eyes were tired but sharp. People who thought it didn't matter, he said. On the third floor, I found a door that wasn't on my list. No number, no marking. Just a door where the wall should have been. It was unlocked. I stood there for a long time, holding my key inches from the handle. Listening. There was no sound from inside, no breathing, no movement. Just the feeling that someone was standing on the other side, close enough to hear me. I locked it anyway. As I walked back to the stairs, I noticed something written on my clipboard, a note in my handwriting. Remember to lock IT from your side too. I did not remember writing that. When I reached the lobby, the chair had moved again. This time it was facing the hallway, and it was closer to the desk than before. By the third night, the building knew me. I did not think that at first. I just felt it in small ways. The way the lights came on ahead of me instead of behind. The way the echo of my steps returned slower, as if the hall needed time to answer. The sign-in book was already open when I arrived. My name was written neatly, the time filled in, earlier than I had arrived. I crossed it out and wrote the correct time. The ink bled into the page like the paper was damp. The chair in the lobby was no longer by the mailboxes. It sat directly in front of the elevator doors. No one was in it. The elevator dinged when I passed, even though I hadn't pressed the button. The doors slid open just enough for me to see the dark inside. I took the stairs. On the first floor, every door was locked. I checked them anyway. Each handle cold, solid, final. At the far end of the hall, something stood in front of Unit 1J. It was not facing me. It stood with its forehead against the door, unmoving. Its arms hung loose at its sides. Its back was thin, stretched tight over bone. I could see the door number through it. The figure was transparent, but not faint. Clear, like glass. I watched it breathe. Slow, patient. I said nothing. I stepped closer, carefully, my boots barely lifting from the floor. When I was 3 steps away, the figure lifted its head. It did not turn around. The door handle behind its face began to move. Slowly, carefully, trying not to make noise. I stepped back. The handle stopped. The figure vanished without sound. The door was unlocked. On the second floor, the mother with the chain door was standing in the hall for the first time. She held the chain in her hands, the way someone holds a broken necklace. They come through the ones we forget, she said quietly. I asked her who she meant. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. The checks you skip, she said. The locks you trust. I finished the floor faster than I should have. I marked everything as secure, even when I wasn't sure. On the third floor I heard knocking. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. One knock every few seconds. It came from behind a door I had locked myself. I stood in front of it and counted. 1, 2, 3. The knocking stopped. I put my hand on the handle. It was warm, I did not open it. When I returned to the lobby, the chair was occupied. The elderly man sat in it, grocery bag at his feet. "They're not breaking in," he said. "They're being led back." I asked him who let them. He stood up slowly, bones creaking louder than the building. "You did," he said. Then he walked past me and into the hallway. I followed him. There were doors open behind him as he passed. I could hear them, one by one, unlocking. I stopped following the old man halfway down the hall, not because he vanished, not because he did anything strange. I stopped because I realized something was wrong with the doors. They were not opening outward anymore. They were already open. Each one stood just wide enough for someone to stand behind it without being seen, not inside the apartment, not fully in the hall, balanced in between, waiting space. I stood still and listened. From some units I heard nothing. From others I heard the soft sound of weight settling, a mattress responding, floorboards learning a shape again. I backed away until my shoulder touched the wall. The old man was gone. The hallway lights dimmed, then steadied. I noticed then that the hallway had become longer. The exit sign was farther away than it should have been. I walked toward it anyway. As I passed each open door, I felt eyes on me, not staring, not aggressive, observing. I did not look inside any of the units. I had learned that lesson without being taught. At the stairwell, the door was closed. It should not have been. I pulled it open and stepped inside. The stairwell smelled like rust and damp concrete. Sound echoed wrong, like the walls were farther apart than they looked. Halfway down, I heard footsteps above me, slow, careful. Matching my pace, I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I took one step. They took one step. I did not look up. I reached the lobby and nearly ran into the desk chair. It had been dragged directly in front of the stairs. The legs scraped the floor as if it had been moved recently. The sign-in book lay open on the desk. Another entry had been added beneath mine. No name, just a time. Earlier than I arrived. Earlier than anyone should have been inside. The front door was closed. Locked. I pulled on it. It did not move. Behind me the elevator dinged. The doors opened slowly. Inside the light was on. Someone stood in the back corner, facing the wall, head tilted forward, arms slack. It did not turn. The elevator doors stayed open, waiting for me to decide. I stepped back. The doors closed on their own. The building exhaled. I unlocked the front door with shaking hands and stepped outside into the night. The air felt thinner than it should have, like the building had been holding onto it. I did not go home right away. I stood across the street and looked at the complex. Lights flickered on different floors, not randomly but deliberately. One by one, doors opening where no one lived. I realized then that locking them was no longer about keeping anything out. It was about keeping something from standing where it remembered being. I went back inside, because it felt worse to leave them open. After that night, I stopped telling myself I could quit. The idea came up sometimes, faint and distant, like a memory that didn't belong to me. I would acknowledge it the way you acknowledge bad weather, something you notice but do not plan around. The building had adjusted to my return. The lobby lights were already on when I entered. The sign-in book lay closed this time, placed neatly in the center of the desk, like it had been prepared for me. I opened it. My name filled the page. Not once, not twice. Every line, different handwriting. Same name. I closed the book without signing. The chair was back near the mailboxes, turned slightly, angled toward the hallway, as if it had been watching something move past. I took the stairs again. The elevator dinged behind me, once, softly, I did not turn around. On the first floor, the air felt crowded, not noisy, not busy, occupied. Every door was closed. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I checked Unit 1A locked. Solid. Unit 1 billion. Locked. Unit 1 degree Celsius resisted when I turned the key, like someone was holding the lock from the inside. It gave way slowly, reluctantly. Inside, the apartment was no longer empty. There was a mattress on the floor. Old, yellowed, no sheets, no pillows. An indentation lay in the center, deep and familiar, like someone had been lying there for a long time without moving. The room smelled faintly of sweat and old breath. I did not step inside. As I backed out, I saw fingerprints on the doorframe. Not fresh, worn, pressed into the paint over years. Someone had stood there often, waiting for someone else to come. I locked the door. The lock clicked once, then again. On the second floor, the hallway lights flickered as I passed. Behind me, I heard the sound of locks engaging, not opening, closing. Ahead of me, a figure stood halfway out of a doorway. Only its shoulder and part of its head were visible. It did not move when I approached. The skin was pale and tight, stretched over bone. The eye I could see was open, cloudy, focused on the opposite wall. I stopped a few feet away. "You can't stay there," I said quietly. The figure did not respond. I reached for the door handle. The moment my fingers brushed it, the figure stepped backward into the apartment, slow and obedient, like it had been waiting for permission. The door closed on its own. I locked it. My hand shook the whole time. On the third floor, the extra door had multiplied. There were 3 of them now, all unmarked, all identical, all unlocked. I stood in front of the first one and felt something on the other side lean closer, not touching, just near enough to feel. I locked all 3 doors. When I turned back toward the stairs, the hallway behind me was lined with figures, standing in doorways, half hidden, watching without expression. None of them moved. They didn't need to. As I descended the stairs, I understood something I hadn't before. They weren't trying to get in anymore. They were checking which doors still belonged to them, and they were starting to remember which ones I had failed. By the 6th night, I no longer checked the time. I still wore my watch. I still felt it on my wrist when I moved my arm, but I stopped looking at it because every time I did, the hands were pointed somewhere different than they should have been. Sometimes they were still. Sometimes they moved too fast. Once they were spinning slowly backward. The lobby felt smaller now, the ceiling lower, the walls closer together. The chair near the mailboxes was gone entirely, but the scrape marks remained on the floor, leading toward the hallway, as if it had been dragged and never brought back. The sign-in book was no longer on the desk. I searched for it longer than I should have. Checked drawers, looked under the desk. Finally, I found it on the floor behind the stairs, open to a page I didn't recognize. It was a checklist, not the one they gave me. This one listed doors by description instead of number. Door with cracked paint. Door that sticks when it rains. Door no one remembers locking. Each line had a box beside it. Some were already checked. I took the stairs. On the first floor, the hallway lights were off. Not burned out, turned off. I could tell because when I flipped the switch at the end of the hall, they came on all at once, harsh and white. Every door was open, not wide, not inviting, just enough. Inside each apartment, something stood close to the doorway, never fully visible. A shoulder, a sleeve, The outline of a head angled slightly forward. All of them were facing me. I walked slowly, keys ready, heart heavy in my chest. I locked doors as I went, one by one. With every click, the air behind me felt thinner. When I reached the end of the hall, I realized the beginning of it was gone. Not dark. Gone. The wall had closed where the hallway should have been, smooth and unmarked, like it had never existed. I turned back. The doors I had locked were open again. The second floor smelled like metal and damp fabric. The mother's door was unchained now, wide open. The apartment inside was empty except for the chain, coiled neatly on the floor. On the far wall, handprints marked the paint. Adult-sized, child-sized, pressed deep, overlapping, like people had leaned there together for a long time. A figure stood in the corner. This one looked clearer than the others, more solid, older. Its face was slack, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on the door. It spoke without moving its lips. "You didn't come back." I did not ask who it was talking to. I locked the door. The words followed me anyway. On the third floor, the unmarked doors were gone. In their place were familiar ones. Doors I recognized from other buildings, other jobs, other nights. A door with a dent from a fire extinguisher. A door with peeling numbers held on by tape. A door I remembered deciding to deal with later. My hands shook as I locked them. One of the doors knocked back. Just once. Not loud. Not angry. As if to remind me it was still there. When I reached the stairwell, I found the old man sitting on the steps again. His grocery bag was gone. "They don't leave," he said softly. "They settle." I asked him why I was still here. He looked up at me, eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "Because you're good at this," he said. "You always were." Behind him, a door clicked open. I did not follow him this time. I went back down to the lobby and locked the front door from the inside. Then I checked the handle twice and stood there listening, because somewhere above me, a door was being tested, carefully, patiently. I began to notice the pattern in my body before I noticed it in the building. My hands hurt when I woke up, as if I'd been gripping metal all night. My shoulders ached from holding themselves tight. My jaw stayed clenched even when I tried to relax it. I was sleeping inside the building now, not every night, just enough. There was a maintenance room off the lobby with a cot and a sink. I told myself it made sense. The walk home felt longer every time. The halls felt easier when I was already inside them. The cot smelled like dust and old fabric. Someone had used it before me. Probably many people. I woke once to the sound of a door locking. Close. Very close. I did not get up to check. During my rounds, I started carrying fewer keys. The ring was heavy, loud. The sound carried too far down the halls. I told myself I knew which ones mattered. On the first floor, the figures no longer stood in the doorways. They stood inside the apartments now, far enough back that the door could close without touching them. I locked doors without looking in. On the second floor, the hall felt longer again. The mother's apartment was gone. The doorframe remained, but beyond it was brick, fresh, unmarked. Someone had sealed it from the inside. On the third floor, I heard movement ahead of me, slow steps, dragging, someone walking without lifting their feet. I followed the sound without thinking. At the end of the hall, a door stood open wider than the rest. Inside, the apartment was dark, but I could see a shape seated on the floor, back against the wall. It looked like a man. His head was bowed. His hands rested on his knees. He looked tired in a way I recognized. "You can lock it," he said quietly. "It won't change anything." I did not answer. I locked the door. The lock resisted, then gave way. As I turned, I saw that the hallway behind me was full. Every door was open now. Every figure stood in the threshold. They were closer than before, near enough that I could see details, wrinkles, old injuries, the soft collapse of mouths that had stopped being used. They were not angry. They were waiting. I walked through them. They parted without touching me. When I reached the stairs, I felt something brush my arm just once, not grabbing, not stopping me, acknowledging. In the lobby, the sign-in book had returned to the desk. It was open to a new page, a checklist. Only one item remained unchecked: lock from the inside. I stood there for a long time, staring at the front door. Behind me, footsteps moved across the lobby floor, slow, unhurried, coming to see if I would remember. I did not lock the front door that night. I told myself it was because I needed air. I told myself it was because I was still in control. The truth sat heavier in my chest than either of those explanations. Leaving it unlocked felt like relief. The building responded immediately, not with noise, not with movement, with ease. The halls seemed to widen. The light steadied. The pressure in my ears faded, like something had stopped pushing inward. On the first floor, doors that had been resisting me turned easily now. Locks slid without complaint. It felt like cooperation. Inside one apartment, I saw a figure lying on the floor where the mattress had been, curled on its side. Still, the indentation remained beneath it, unchanged, as if it had always been there. I did not check its face. On the second floor, the corridor smelled clean for the first time, like soap, like something trying to be ready for inspection. I heard quiet voices behind doors, not speaking, breathing together, in rhythm. The third floor no longer felt like the third floor. The stairs ended in a hallway I did not recognize. The paint was a different color. The carpet newer. The doors unmarked but familiar. I knew which ones would be unlocked before I touched them. I began locking only those. When I returned to the lobby, the old man was standing by the front door. He was not holding a grocery bag. His hands were empty. "Clean. You don't have to stay," he said. The door behind him was open. Night air spilled in, cool and sharp. I could see the street, the sidewalk, a passing car, normal things. "What happens if I leave it unlocked?" I asked. He smiled, not kindly, not cruelly. "They come home easier," he said. I thought of the doors I had skipped in other places, other buildings, other nights, the ones I told myself someone else would handle. My hand rested on the doorframe. Behind me, I felt presence, not touching, not rushing, waiting to see what I would do when it was simple. I stepped back. The old man nodded once and moved aside. The door closed on its own. The lock turned from the inside. Somewhere above us, a door clicked open. Another answered it. Then another as the sound moved downward, floor by floor, until it reached the lobby. I stood very still, because I understood now that they weren't trying to leave. They were making sure everything stayed open the way I had taught them. The building stopped pretending after that. It no longer waited for night to change. The difference between day and dark blurred until the windows showed only pale light or nothing at all. I stopped checking outside to confirm which one it was. The front door remained locked from the inside. I tested it once each shift, out of habit, and felt the same resistance every time. Solid, certain. Final, I did not panic. Panic requires the belief that something can still be different. The sign-in book no longer asked for my name. It listed tasks: check doors, stand nearby. Do not interrupt. I followed them. On the first floor, the figures moved freely now, not walking, shifting, adjusting positions inside rooms they had reclaimed. They no longer vanished when I looked at them. One stood in the kitchen of Unit 1B, hands resting on the counter, staring at the sink. Its reflection appeared faintly in the metal, distorted but present. I asked it quietly if it needed anything. It did not answer. It turned its head toward the doorway instead, waiting. On the second floor, the hallway no longer ended where it should have. Doors repeated. Some I recognized from this building, others from places I had worked years ago. I remembered skipping checks because I was tired, because it was late, because nothing ever happened. Those doors were open. Figures stood inside them, closer to the hall than the others. Almost crossing the threshold, on the third floor I saw something new, a door opening inward. Not toward the hallway, toward me. It belonged to a small room that should not have been there. No window, no number. Inside sat a chair. The same chair from the lobby. Someone was sitting in it. The shape leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, head tilted up enough that I could see its eyes. They were open, clear, focused on me. You keep forgetting one, it said. I asked which one. The figure gestured gently toward my chest. The one that lets you leave, it said. The room behind it stretched deeper than it should have. I could see outlines of doors lining the walls, all facing inward, waiting for me to decide where I belonged. When I returned to the lobby, the desk was gone. The sign-in book lay on the floor, open to a blank page. A pen rested beside it. The front door stood inches from my back. I could feel the lock through the wood, engaged, secure, above me. Footsteps crossed the ceiling. They were heavier now, more certain. They were not checking doors anymore. They were settling into place. I began to lose track of which parts of the building were mine to enter, not because they were forbidden, because they no longer reacted to me. Doors stayed as they were when I approached. Open ones remained open. Locked ones did not invite testing. The keys on my ring felt ceremonial, their weight familiar but unnecessary. On the first floor, a figure stood directly in the hallway now, not in a doorway, not half hidden, fully present. It faced the wall, forehead resting against the paint. The posture was one I recognized immediately. It was how people stood when they were waiting for someone to come check on them. I stood behind it and felt the air shift. The figure did not turn. I moved around it slowly, careful not to touch. Its face was my height. Its eyes were open, unfocused, fixed on a point just beyond the wall. You didn't hear us knock, it said. It did not move its mouth. I nodded. That seemed like the correct response. On the second floor, the hallway had been furnished. A small table stood near the stairwell. On it sat a stack of forms. Maintenance reports, inspection sheets, all partially filled out in handwriting that looked like mine. Each one ended the same way. Check completed. No issues found. I flipped through them until I found the last page. It was blank, waiting. On the third floor, the doors had learned to open for me. I passed a unit and felt the handle turn on its own. The door eased open just enough to reveal a dark shape inside. I kept walking. Behind me, it followed at a distance I could not measure. When I reached the stairwell, I found it blocked by a door that had not been there before. Unmarked. Solid. Locked. I tested it once. From the other side, I felt the lock turn, carefully, as if someone were matching my movement. Back in the lobby, the chair had returned. This time, it faced me. I sat down without deciding to. The floor felt steady beneath my feet. The building felt balanced. For the first time since I started the job, nothing was pressing in on me. The sign-in book slid across the floor and stopped at my feet. The pen rolled after it. I picked it up. My hand did not shake. I wrote my name. When I finished, I noticed something else written beneath it. A shift schedule. No end date. After I wrote my name, the building stopped watching me so closely. That was how it felt. Like a pressure easing. Like being trusted. The lobby stayed quiet. The lights did not flicker. The front door did not test itself against the lock. Everything held steady, as if stability had been the reward. I sat in the chair longer than I meant to. It fit me. The seat had worn itself into a shape that felt familiar, like I had rested there many times before. When I stood up, the chair did not scrape the floor. It did not move at all. I took the stairs again. The steps felt shallower now, like the effort had been reduced. The building was making allowances for me. On the first floor, doors were closing, not slamming, not rushing, just closing the way people do when they are finished for the night. Figures moved inside apartments further from the hall. I could still see them, but only faintly, like reflections in dark glass. One passed close enough that I felt a shift in temperature. Cool, dry, empty. "Thank you," it said, without sound. I nodded again. On the second floor, the table of forms was gone. The hallway was clean. No extra doors, no repeating numbers. The walls looked freshly painted, though the smell was old. The mother's apartment was back. The chain hung neatly on the inside of the door. The door itself was locked. From the other side, I heard breathing. Calm. Even... I did not knock. On the third floor, the unfamiliar hallway had shortened. Doors that did not belong here had sealed themselves into the walls. Only the original units remained. At the far end, the small room with the chair was empty. The chair was gone. In its place, a door. It was closed, locked. I checked it once, out of habit. It did not respond. It felt permanent. Satisfied, I returned to the lobby. The sign-in book was back on the desk now. Closed. Filed where it belonged. My watch ticked normally again. I looked at it for the first time in days and saw that almost no time had passed. Outside, through the glass, the street was still there. Cars still passed. People still walked by without looking in. The front door remained locked. From the inside, I tested it once more. It did not move. That felt right, because everything that needed to be inside was accounted for now, and everything that needed someone to watch over it finally had one. I stopped counting nights after that. The idea of a night implied a day waiting on the other side, and the building no longer worked that way. The light through the windows stayed pale and flat, never bright enough to suggest morning, never dark enough to promise rest. Time had thinned. It moved, but quietly, like something passing through water. I began my rounds without the clipboard. The checklist lived in my head now. I knew which doors needed attention and which ones did not like to be disturbed. On the first floor, most apartments were settled. Doors closed, locks firm. Figures inside had taken positions that felt final. Sitting, lying down, standing with their backs to the walls. They no longer watched me as I passed. In Unit 1C, the mattress indentation was gone. The floor was smooth again, as if the weight had finally lifted. That felt like progress. In Unit 1F, I paused longer than usual. The door was locked but warm. The heat seeped through the metal into my palm. On the other side, something shifted, adjusting itself, like someone turning over in sleep. I did not unlock it. On the second floor, the hallway lights were dimmer, softer, the kind of light meant to avoid waking anyone. I heard quiet movement behind several doors, not restless, not urgent, occupied. Near the stairwell I found a new door. It had my name on it. No number, no handle wear. Just my name printed cleanly on a small metal plate. I stood there for a long time, hand hovering inches from the lock. From inside I heard nothing that worried me more than if I had heard knocking. I left it alone. On the third floor the building showed me things without being asked. As I passed certain doors, images surfaced in my mind. Places I had worked before. Buildings I had signed off on without checking properly. Hallways I had rushed through because I was tired, or late, or eager to go home. I saw doors left unlocked. I saw rooms left unattended. I saw people waiting. The images did not accuse. They simply existed. When I returned to the lobby, I found the old man standing near the desk again. He looked healthier now, straighter, less like he was waiting to disappear. "You're doing well," he said. I asked him if there was anything left to fix. He looked toward the stairs, then back at me. "Only one," he said. I asked him which one. He gestured toward the upper floors, toward the door with my name. "The one you keep avoiding," he said. I sat down in the chair and rested my hands on my knees. The building was quiet, stable, full in a way that felt deliberate. I understood then that neglect did not end when things were secured. It ended when you stayed above me. A lock turned once, testing, waiting for me to come check. I tried to convince myself the door with my name was only a formality, a way for the building to make a point, a reminder. It did not mean I had to open it. It did not mean anything would happen if I ignored it. That kind of thinking had worked before. It did not work anymore. The next time I climbed the stairs, I felt the difference immediately. The third floor pulled at me, not physically, something quieter, like gravity applied to attention instead of weight. I walked past the door with my name once. Nothing happened. I walked past it a second time. The air changed, warmer, thicker. The hallway lights dimmed just slightly, enough that I noticed without being able to explain it. I stopped in front of the door. The metal plate was cool under my fingers. My name looked right there. Correct spelling, correct spacing, no scratches, no wear. Someone had cared enough to get it right. I put my ear to the door. At first I heard nothing, then I heard movement. Not footsteps, not breathing. The sound of fabric shifting, someone adjusting themselves in a small space. I stepped back. The lock turned, just a fraction, enough to let me know it could. On the first floor, a door opened on its own while I was checking another. I heard it clearly, the slow pull, the quiet click. I went to it immediately and locked it. The pressure in the building eased. That became the pattern. Whenever I avoided the door with my name, something else loosened, somewhere else opened, somewhere less contained. On the second floor, I found 2 doors ajar that had been sealed for days. Figures stood closer to the hallway than before, watching without expression. I locked them. The figures retreated. By the time I returned to the lobby, I was tired in a way sleep would not touch. The chair waited for me. It always did. I sat and stared at the stairs. The old man did not appear that night. No one spoke to me. The building did not offer advice. It simply adjusted. Above me I heard the door with my name being tested again. Once, then twice. Not impatient, persistent. I realized then what it wanted from me was not surrender. It wanted responsibility. If I did not open that door, the building would keep compensating, shifting the burden outward. Reopening things I had already secured. Neglect spreads. I stood up. My legs felt heavy but steady. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, listening to the building settle around me, preparing. The hallway on the 3rd floor was empty. All doors closed, except one. Mine. The door with my name was open wider than before. Not wide enough to invite me in. Wide enough to acknowledge I had arrived. The light inside was dim, the same pale tone as the rest of the building, but it felt older somehow, like it had been waiting longer than the other rooms. I stood in the hallway and listened. Inside, I heard the quiet sound of a room being occupied, the faint shift of weight, the soft creak of something bearing down slowly and then settling. I stepped closer. The smell was familiar. Dust, old paint, the trace of metal that comes from touching keys too often. It smelled like my hands. The room was small, no windows, a single light fixture in the ceiling, a chair against the far wall, not the lobby chair. This one was newer, cleaner, unmarked. On the floor beside it lay a clipboard. My clipboard. The inspection sheets were clipped neatly in place, every page filled out, every box checked. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. I flipped through them, dates I did not remember, times that overlapped, notes written in a tone that felt practiced, door secured, no issues found, follow-up unnecessary. At the bottom of the last page was a final line assigned. I set the clipboard down. Behind me, the hallway was quiet. No movement. No doors testing themselves. The building was holding its breath. I looked at the chair again. It was positioned so that if someone sat in it, they would be facing the door, facing outward, watching. I understood then that this room was not meant to keep me in. It was meant to keep me here. I stepped inside. The door did not close immediately. I turned and looked back down the hallway. The 3rd floor stretched away from me, stable and sealed, doors firm, lights steady. Everything was where it belonged. I reached for the handle. From somewhere deep in the building, a lock turned, then another, then another. I closed the door gently. The lock slid into place without resistance. For the first time, I locked it from the inside. The room felt complete. The quiet inside the room was different from the rest of the building. It was not empty quiet. It was held quiet. The kind that settles once everything has been put back where it belongs. I stood for a moment with my hand still on the lock, feeling the faint vibration of the building through the metal. It was steady now. No testing, no hesitation, approval. I moved farther into the room. The floor was clean. No dust gathered in the corners. The walls showed no cracks, no stains, no signs of age. They looked maintained in a way the rest of the building never had. The chair waited. I did not sit yet. I picked up the clipboard again and checked the last page more carefully. Beneath the word assigned, a time had been written. Not a date, just a time. The same one I used to clock in. I placed the clipboard on the chair and sat down slowly. The seat accepted my weight without sound, as if it had been measured in advance. From here I could hear the building more clearly than ever before. Not individual sounds, patterns. Locks being tested gently, then left alone. Doors adjusting their alignment. Floors settling under familiar weight. No urgency anywhere. I realized then that I was no longer walking the building. I was listening for it. When a door on the 1st floor shifted slightly, I felt it in my chest before I heard it. I stood, unlocked my door, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty. Every door was closed. I walked to the stairwell and paused, listening. Somewhere below, a lock hesitated. I descended one flight. The door in question was Unit 2D. The handle was warm. On the other side, something stood too close. I locked it. The warmth faded. When I returned to my room, the door was waiting for me, still open, patient. I stepped inside and locked it again. This time, the building responded immediately. A long, slow sound moved through the structure, from the lowest floor to the roof. Not a sigh, not a breath, completion. I sat back down. Hours passed, or something like them. The light in my room never changed, but I felt the rhythm of checks being completed, of spaces holding. Once I thought I heard knocking, very faint, somewhere far away. I did not get up. The sound stopped on its own. Later, I heard footsteps approach my door and then stop. They did not test the handle. They did not knock. They waited. I remained seated, eyes on the door, hands resting calmly in my lap, because the work was no longer about fixing what was broken. It was about staying alert, about being present, about making sure nothing that belonged inside was ever left unattended again. After that night, I no longer measured my shifts in hours. Time became irrelevant. The building had a rhythm. I followed it. I moved when it moved. I waited when it waited. The front door remained locked from the inside. Every floor stayed stable. Every hallway maintained. Doors that once resisted now accepted my presence without protest. On the first floor, I noticed details I had never seen before. A small scratch near a door frame. Dust disturbed in patterns that suggested someone or something had walked the hall before me. I locked the doors anyway, slowly, carefully, twice to make sure. The figures no longer needed to stand in thresholds. They occupied apartments, still and silent, waiting without watching. On the second floor, I passed the mother's apartment. The chain hung inside, coiled neatly. The door was locked. Behind it, I sensed presence, quiet, patient, neither threatening nor attentive, simply there. The third floor had grown shorter. Hallways I once counted steps through had become compressed. Doors lined up differently. Some I'd never noticed before. A faint impression of numbers painted where the walls met the floor. I walked past them all. Keys in hand. Locks engaged as needed. No rushing. No hesitation. At the far end of the hall, the door with my name waited. I reached it and paused. From inside, I heard the faintest sound of movement, the shifting of weight, a slight creak of the floor beneath. I did not open it. I locked it. Twice, and waited. From somewhere above, a lock clicked. Then another, not testing me, not threatening, just acknowledging. The building exhaled. I understood then that the work was not about doors, not about locks. It was about presence, watching, being there for everything that would remain. I was the anchor, and the building, patient, silent, unyielding, had claimed me as its own. I stopped thinking about nights, hours, or days. I only moved when the building shifted, only spoke when it allowed, only locked doors when it required it. The front door remained locked from the inside. I had long stopped testing it. The lobby felt permanent now, a place that had always been and always would be. The first floor was stable. Doors closed, locks firm. Figures inside the apartments no longer moved unless the door was touched. When I passed, I could sense them, quiet, patient, waiting without acknowledgement. On the second floor, the hallway had narrowed. Every door was aligned perfectly. The mother's chained apartment remained sealed. I checked it carefully. The chain had not moved. Behind it, breathing was faint and regular. I climbed the stairs to the third floor. The hallway ended at the door with my name. I had avoided it for so long. Now it waited, patient, almost expectant. I stepped forward, hand on the handle. From inside I felt a slight pressure, a shape adjusting itself. I did not unlock it yet. The building exhaled. I understood then that it was not asking me to open the door. It was asking me to accept responsibility, to be present, to stay. I locked it again from the inside, feeling the weight of the entire building settle around me. After that night, the building became my rhythm. I walked halls I already knew, checking doors I had already locked. Every step echoed slightly differently, a reminder that the space had changed without notice. Figures no longer stood in thresholds. They were inside, sitting, leaning, standing against walls, watching nothing, observing everything. They did not move when I walked past. They simply existed. On the first floor, a door I had skipped one night years ago opened gently as I passed. I did not approach it. I did not check it. I just locked it. Twice to make sure. The second floor was quiet. The mother's apartment remained sealed. Behind it, the faint presence of a figure, calm, patient, waiting without expectation. I left it untouched. The third floor held the door with my name. I touched the handle lightly, feeling the pressure inside shift. I did not unlock it. I did not need to. The weight of responsibility was enough. In the lobby, the chair remained. I sat in it and listened to the building breathe. Locks engaged in distant halls, doors shifted slightly, floors settled. All of it was still, all of it was mine to watch. The building taught me stillness. I no longer checked the clipboard. I no longer counted floors. I moved slowly, deliberately, listening to the faint movements of the apartments, feeling the figures shift inside their rooms, observing the doors as if they were living things. The first floor smelled faintly of dust and metal. A door creaked open slightly, testing itself. I did not respond immediately. When I did, I locked it. Twice, solid. The second floor hallway had shortened again. Figures shifted inside their apartments, moving just enough to be felt. I heard faint breathing, not loud, not threatening, just present. The third floor door waited. My name on it. I had never opened it. I had never crossed the threshold. I did not need to. The building held it for me. The weight of the lock pressed against my palm. Responsibility pressed against my chest. I returned to the lobby. The chair was empty this time. The air was still. The sign-in book lay closed on the desk. The pen had been rolled away. I understood then that the building did not need me to act. It only needed me to exist, to observe, to remember. Locks engaged on their own. Doors shifted slightly in the distance. Figures moved behind walls. All was accounted for. All was contained. I remained. I am still here. I sit in the lobby chair each night, or whatever time it is now. I do not leave. I do not walk beyond the building except in thought. Every door is locked. Every floor stable. Every figure settled. The door with my name remains closed. The lock holds. From the inside, I do not need to open it. I do not need to check it. I am enough. The building moves around me, adjusts, shifts, settles. I feel it beneath my hands on the chair arms, beneath my feet on the lobby floor. Every shift, every click, every soft turn of a lock is a language I have learned to hear. No one comes or goes. No one disturbs what has been put in place. The building is complete. I am present. I am watching. I am responsible. I am home. And the building knows it. Story 3. We arrived at the cabin on a quiet afternoon. The air smelled like damp wood and earth that had been sitting untouched for decades. The kind of smell that feels heavy in your chest, like it's pressing memories down into your lungs. It looked ordinary at first, small, worn, quiet. But I noticed the shadows immediately, not the ones from trees or the corners of the rooms. Something else, thin, hovering just at the edge of vision, moving slightly when you weren't looking. The children explored. Their laughter sounded bright, but too loud, echoing unnaturally in the empty spaces. I tried to convince myself it was just the acoustics, just the house settling. But then the whisper started. Soft, almost nothing at first, a breath of sound that seemed to come from the walls. "They are here." I stopped moving. My wife didn't notice. The children didn't hear it, or maybe they didn't want to. That night, in our temporary bedroom, I saw it for the first time, pale, thin, standing by the door, silent, watching. Its face was blank, but the eyes seemed to know things no one should. The whisper returned, now clearer, pressing against my ears. "You cannot hide them." I wanted to move, to scream, to leave, but I was frozen. The weight of it held me in place. By morning, I realized that the house, or whatever this presence was, did not want us gone. It wanted us inside, and it wanted to watch. The next day, everything felt heavier. The air in the cabin seemed thick, as if it remembered every sound, every movement we made. I noticed my son standing at the window for long stretches, staring outside, saying nothing. When I asked him what he was looking at, he turned slowly, eyes wide, and whispered, "They're waiting." I froze. My wife tried to laugh it off, telling me children have vivid imaginations. But the unease in her voice betrayed her. Something about the way she moved around the room suggested she felt it too. Objects started shifting. Small things. A cup on the counter slightly tilted. A chair pushed back, though no one had touched it. Nothing violent, nothing loud. Just precise. Like the space was alive and rearranging itself around us. That night, I caught it again in the bedroom, standing just beyond the edge of the bed, pale, its head tilted in curiosity, its eyes locked on me, unblinking, unafraid. The whisper returned. They belong to me. I realized it wasn't just watching the house. It was watching us, not the building, not the walls. Us. And that made the cabin feel smaller than ever, as if every corner could hide it, every shadow could carry it. And there was no place for us to escape. It doesn't matter anymore if I scream or stay silent. The ghost never leaves. It moves freely, always present, always close. My wife walks through the cabin, her steps measured, her face calm, but not hers. The eyes are someone else's. The voice sometimes falters, carrying echoes that are older than I can remember. The children follow her lead. Their laughter sounds the same, but it no longer belongs fully to them. Their small gestures, the way they hold their hands, the rhythm of their breathing. Something else moves beneath the surface, something patient, precise, waiting. I tried once to intervene. I reached for my wife's hand, but it felt heavy, as if I were touching a stranger wearing her skin. The ghost was already there. It pressed its presence into every corner of the room, every shadow, every breath. I realized that resistance is meaningless. The family doesn't need to fight. They don't need to scream. They just exist alongside something that has already claimed part of them. The cabin feels alive now, but not with us. It is alive with her, the one who cried. The centuries of regret, the silent debts passed down through blood and memory. I am left as the witness, the observer, the last one untouched but forever marked. My family smiles, talks, moves, but the truth is clear. In every subtle motion the curse is settled. It has found its place, and I can do nothing but watch. The shadows wait, always patient, always present. And I know that the moment I turn my eyes, they will have moved again. Closer, sharper, permanent. I am the witness, and that is enough.